Hello and welcome to Drupal Nights. Our presenter today will be Heather Bauer, talking about mega menus and UX design. Take it away, Heather.
Thanks, Matt. That is a very bright light. All right, so today I'm going to be talking to you about various site navigation styles, the design thereof, and some questions that you need to ask yourself before you get started. As Matt so kindly said, I am Heather Bauer. I work at BioRAFT. I'm sure that was a little unclear by my logo. So I am a UX product specialist, which means I focus on the user experience of our product as well as some product management. I graduated from Bentley with an MS in Human Factors and Information Design, which is basically a fancy term for usability. I learned how to talk to people about the problems that they are having with their software and talk to them about how they can avoid it. I was also the co-organizer of the Boston Service Jam back in 2014 and was an expert in residence for General Assembly UX Design course the summer of 2014. BioRAFT, as I'm sure y'all are somewhat familiar with, is an enterprise safety, compliance, and training software for lab scientists and those that work with them, built with Drupal, which means that we try to keep people safe by making sure that they're trained and they're compliant with the things that they're supposed to be doing. We are hiring, so if you're interested, certainly give any of the BioRAFT folk a holler at the end. So the philosophy that we're going to be talking about today: if the user can't find it, the function's not there. If a tree falls in a forest, did it really make a sound? We don't know. So I'll be giving a high-level overview of information architecture, some guidelines on how to do research, as well as some tips and tricks, an overview of different kinds of navigation and the way they're designed, some things to keep in mind. So information architecture. One of the things I love about the metaphors in this field is they all mean what they sound like. So just like an architect is deciding where the walls are going to go in your house, load-bearing beams so that everything doesn't fall down, go boom, information architecture is the same concept with your data, making sure that things are in the correct place to support the following pieces so that people can actually find what it is they're supposed to be finding. So information architecture creates intuitive ways to navigate data. That intuitive part is really important because you don't want people getting frustrated, clicking on random things, going down rabbit holes, going, forget this, flip a table and walk away. It makes the information easy to find for that same reason. And your schemes have to be concise. You don't want people having to go through a crazy number of steps. They have to be descriptive. People need to know what it is that they are clicking on. They have to be mutually exclusive. People have to know whether they should turn left or right. If someone just says turn at the stop sign, there's a good chance that you're going to go in the wrong direction. And they have to possess information sent. Information sent, you ask? Just like it sounds, it's that path that a bloodhound would follow to get to where it needs to go. They're just cues that indicate what you're looking for is down a particular path. So you know to go left or right. It can inform the decisions, and it allows information that doesn't seem relevant to be discarded or ignored. We can be talking about vast amounts of information that people just can't process all of it. So if they can say, okay, I'm looking for something blue and those things are red, I don't need to know about that. That doesn't need to come into my brain. So the way the information set works is user arrives at a page, they search for clues. Did they find any clues? No? Okay, then this probably isn't where I'm supposed to be. I'm going to just go somewhere else. But if they did find the cue, they're going to follow it. Is the scent getting weaker? If so, they're going to search for different cues. If it's getting stronger, they continue. Then they get to the point, is this too much effort? Is the thing I'm looking for really worth all of this work? And if it's too much effort, people are going to leave. But if it's not, they'll continue searching, and eventually they're going to find whatever it is that they're looking for, hopefully. If they don't find it, that means that they're going to be stuck in the loop and eventually leave. So the things that users need to know. Am I in the right place? Does the site have what I'm looking for? for? Is there anything better? And what now? So am I in the right place? Make sure that people know what your site is for. Everyone thinks, oh, I've got this beautiful homepage. It tells you everything that you could possibly need to know. People aren't always coming in at your homepage, especially if they're getting to you through a Google search or a link that someone has shared. They can be coming in smack in the middle, which means that every single page you have is now your homepage. So people need to have that context no matter where they come in. Does this site have what I'm looking for? So make sure that you're using organization schemes that make sense to the user. So if they're going to be looking for something alphabetically, make sure that you're not listing it by date created. Make sure your labels are obvious. Thingamajig, not going to tell people what they need to know. And also the navigation should look like navigation. I know there was some issue with iOS 7 when it came out, that super flat design, things didn't have the button around it anymore, so people were confused. They didn't realize that that was actually how they got places. Also, you are here and you were there. Indications are very useful because it helps tell people, okay, you've been there, or this is how you got here if you need to get here again. These are the decisions that you've made. Is there anything better? So let's say you are shopping for an apartment and you need to decide, okay, is this the right apartment, or are there other things that I should be looking at instead? So this is where breadcrumbs can be really useful. We're going to talk about those more. And the see also options. So people who looked at this apartment also looked at these, or people who looked at this book also looked at those. Then what now? The next steps should be obvious. Don't hide your call to action. Don't hide the thing that people need to do. If they are shopping and the thing they need to do is check out with their cart, don't hide their cart button. So you also need to think about, why are users visiting your site? So they might be searching for something like you do on Zillow. Y'all can't tell, I'm looking for an apartment right now, top of mind. They might have a specific task to accomplish. I know I use Trello day in and day out to figure out what I need to do both for work and for personal life. I wrote this presentation using Trello so that I could move the things around. Or maybe they're just killing time, like Facebook, the great killer of time. However, these aren't always mutually exclusive. Sometimes you're dreaming of a new apartment, so you go browse things on Zillow, or you need to find that picture of the time that you were with your cousin's friend for someone else, because you're telling a story and it's really important. So while there is a main reason that people are visiting your site, you can't assume that that's going to be the only reason. So, of course, I'm a user experience person. I'm going to suggest research. That's what you got to do. So, like everything else, observe people so you can study the competition. You can actually have people come in, or if you can't actually talk to users, you can always look at your search logs, see what people are looking for and finding or not finding. It might indicate that there is a gap in your offerings, or it might indicate that people are coming to you for the wrong thing, or they just can't find what they're looking for. So there are a few different methods that I suggest for doing your research. You wouldn't necessarily do all of them, but I'm gonna run through them. Card sort is, again, just what it sounds like. You have cards with items on it and you sort them into logical categories. And just like if you have a deck of cards and you just hand it to someone and say, sort it, how does it make the most sense? Different people will sort. Some will do it in number order, some will do it by suit, some will do it by color. So you're trying to figure out the best way to organize your deck of cards. This is generally a fairly early stage technique. And so there's the open card sort, where you just hand people a stack of things and say, organize it however it makes sense to you, and as many groups as you want, go have fun. Then there's the closed card sort, where you say, okay, sort these into hearts, spades, diamonds, and clubs. With deck of cards, it's kind of obvious which one each of these would go into. When in the real world, some things will be very obvious, and some things every single person is going to put them in a different group. There's also, of course, the hybrid between the two. Okay, so you have these 4 categories, but if you have a 5th or 6th that you want to add, feel free. So ideally, this would be done with users. However, it can also be done with internal stakeholders. It's a good way to get a captive audience fairly quickly. You have your customer service people, your marketing folks, your head of development, and they're people who are pretty knowledgeable about what's going on, what's in your site. And so it also gets some buy-in because they start understanding what this user research thing is. But of course you should validate with real users at some point. I've got a whole list of tools that's mainly for the purposes of when you guys are looking back at the notes if you want to do any of this. So you can do it with something really low fidelity like sticky notes or actual index cards, or there's lots of softwares out there that can help you. Next tool is Sitepath Diagramming, and really what this does is it helps you think about how different users are going to be accomplishing different tasks. So we've got this little stick figure guy coming in at the home page and leaving at the confirmation page, and all the steps that he does in there. So really it's sketching the entire system, but at a very high level. It's good for deciding your site flow, some very early UI decisions, and of course your workflow. It can show a process that you can design for one user and reuse. So if you're thinking about, okay, so we've got our person who is on Amazon because they need to buy a book for a class, or a person who's browsing, and if they find something cool, then awesome, and your person who's looking for power tools. So you might find that the same process works for multiple people, but you can also find that, okay, well, for this other use case, this person's a bit of a special snowflake, so we're gonna have to figure out how to accommodate them if they are someone we want to accommodate. You can always make the decision, you know what, this person isn't our target audience, so we're not gonna shut them out, but we're not gonna bend over backward to make their lives easier, because it might be one person out of a million, and if it's gonna take a large percentage of your time, it's just not worth it. So to do Sitepath diagramming, you need something to draw on, lots of colored drawing implements. You have to be able to draw people. It's really important, but stick figures are okay. And if you have personas, that is really helpful. How many people in the room are familiar with personas? Okay, so about half the room. So personas they're imaginary, but they are representative of different types of users that you have. So when you are thinking about the different people who are going to be using your product, you don't need to be thinking about your potentially millions or billions of users. You only need to think about these 4 or 5 personas that, okay, well, that's how Roger thinks, or that's how Mallory thinks. If you don't have personas, this would be a good time to start thinking about them. So for the how-to, you draw a big circle representing your system. So you've got your in and your out, and then your different types of people around the edge. And then you can see how they're coming into the site, how they're leaving the site, how they're using the site differently, and draw your different scenarios within the circle. Again, this is an earlier high-level stage process. Once you're ready to get deeper into it, you can move to task analysis, which thinks much more about the detailed tasks that people are going to be doing. So it's much more detailed, and it's a way to fill in the little pieces that the scenarios might gloss over. So in Sitepath diagram, you might say login, but in task analysis, you might say enter username, enter password. Was password, hit the login button. was the password accepted? If yes, then move to the home page. If no, then error screen pops up and you have to go back. So it gets down to the much more nitty-gritty and starts getting significantly more into that interaction. And it also helps you point out what questions need to be answered. Like, should this person be forced to log in as soon as they land at our site? Or should it be after they've read 2/3 of this article and they really want to get to the end of it and we can make them do it then? It captures some of the subtleties that you would otherwise miss. So to do a task analysis, you determine what the goal is of the task that you're analyzing. You pull pieces of the scenario that relate directly to it. You determine the subtasks. So you keep trying to break the task down further and further until you're at the bare bone pieces. It's just like factoring that we did in, I don't know, elementary school or middle school, somewhere around there. And so you keep going. So you determine your task, you determine your subtasks, you determine your sub-subtasks, and just keep going. You can also start to add system interaction. So when I was saying before about they hit the button to submit their username and password, and then the system has to do a check to make sure that the username and the password match. Sitemapping is one that people are probably more familiar with. Nods, head shakes. Sitemapping, nods? Okay. So this is really just telling you it's telling you what the different pages are on your site, and there's different kinds. So there is your tree map, your comb map, your star map, and your tab map. And of course they're all slightly different. The tree map is great for hierarchy. So there's a definitive first, then second, then third. The problem with the tree map is that you will very quickly run out of horizontal space, which is when the comb map is very useful, because instead of going wide, it goes down, and you can just keep scrolling for as much space as you need. The star map is for when the hierarchy isn't really strict. It's unclear what is top, middle, bottom. And the tab map is when you are grouping things by similarity instead of hierarchy. So when you're considering your sitemap, should your site be big with tons and tons of pages, or should it be small with only a few very streamlined, very detailed pages? Do you want your site to be shallow or deep? So when I say shallow, are there lots of first level options, or there are only a few first level but many sub options? And are there going to be multiple ways to get to the same page, and how do you want to accomplish that? Note, there's no right or wrong answer to these, like so many things in usability. The answer is it depends on your particular circumstances. So as long as you have thought about these questions and thought about your answers and have good solid reasoning, you're good to move on. Journey mapping is also one of my favorites because you have been thinking about the process of, okay, so they come to the site, they need to log in. They don't have an account with us, so they need to create one. Okay, so we need their name and their birthday and their gender and their social security number, and oh wait, I'm just trying to let them read an article. So the beauty of journey mapping is that it also includes how the user is feeling at each particular step. So you start noticing these red steps of they're getting annoyed. So you have to really think about whether it's worth the irritation that you're putting your users through. So it identifies the problem areas that you might have glossed over before. Like I mentioned, it focuses on the emotional state. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to think about how your user feels. Remember about what I was saying before with the information sent. If they are frustrated, they're gonna leave. And this is a kind of a combination of Sitepath diagramming and task analysis. It also includes your personas, so yeah, double duty out of those. So, okay, you've thought about what things you need in your site, you've thought about whether it's going to be wide or deep, and now it's time to draw the pretty pictures and do design, right? Not quite. So you have to remember there are multiple forces at play. There's the business needs, the user needs, and the technology. So without the business, there's no money to do the thing. Without the users, there's no way to get the money to do the thing. Sometimes your users are paying you directly, and sometimes your users are giving you information that is being sold. Facebook is a great example of that. It's free, but they still make money. And then your technological limitations. So I would caution people to be a bit careful about how much they're limiting themselves now. You're just right now remembering, okay, I'm building a website. So I can't have 3D poppy-uppy things saying go this way. Because everything I've said up until now can be used for any sort of navigation that people are doing, whether it's on a website or in a mall. Also, before I was mentioning, when you're asking for social security numbers for things you don't really need, there are roadblocks that you put in front of your users. Having to log in is a roadblock in front of your user. And sometimes you can put them in the user's way, and sometimes really they're doing more harm than good. So if you are trying to read an article, but it's putting up this survey that you don't want to do, well, then someone else might tell you, oh, if you go in incognito mode and then you Google it, then you can get the article without having to do. And so people are really creative and get around a lot of things. So you have to think about whether the good that will come from the roadblock you're putting up will outweigh the number of people who are going to be annoyed. It also means that if you're making people log in before they have to, you might be chasing them away before they're hooked. So now we're finally ready to start talking about the different types of navigation and the design. So there is your structural navigation, which is a hierarchy including local and global, associative navigation, which are similar items. People who searched for this also searched for. And then there's your utility navigation, so your sign-in, your account, often it has the contact us, although sometimes that's in the footer. So global navigation is global. It's big. It's the big categories. These are the things that should be visible from every page, and it gives a rough feel for what the site is about. So like I mentioned, every page is your home page, so that global navigation is going to give people context of where on earth they are. The local navigation is smaller. It's page specific, although it can be a group of pages as well. Excuse me. It gets to the finer details, and it allows for more specific browsing so that people don't have to wade through all of the things. People access information two different ways. One way is by Pogosticking. There is a parent category before a subcategory, and you have to go back to that parent category before you can go to a new subcategory. So you're jumping back and forth and back and forth. This is usually for really large, varied collections of content. Music is a prime example of that. It requires very clear and clickable sense of place. So people have to know where they are at all times, so they know where they have to go back to without relying on the back button. Hiding top-level categories can make it easier to focus, but there's also some danger in that because if they want to go back to that parent level, they can't. It does allow for some space-saving methods so that you don't have to have as much visible at once. Whereas the opposite is crabwalking, so people get down, they get to a level, and then they're walking side to side. So they can move between categories at the same depth without having to bounce back. This does make for easier error recovery because they're less likely to end up all the way down the wrong rabbit hole. But it requires everything of the same level to be visible at the same time, so it does take a lot more screen real estate. Again, this is one of those situations where there's no right or wrong answer for what it should be. You just have to think about the information that you have and what is likely to be the most useful. So there are different kinds of classification. People are pretty familiar with the hierarchical, but faceted classification is becoming more and more popular. If people are tagging information, then you can search by any of the tags. So going back to apartments, there's parking, it's a 2-bedroom, it's pet friendly. There are various different angles that you can come at it, but they have varying levels of importance to different people. Recipes is another area that you're seeing this a lot, because you can be talking about gluten-free or low calorie, or what am I going to do with this chicken that I have left over, or I want something sweet. And there can be a lot. Chicken and sweet would be a weird combination, but we're going with it. So there could be a lot of ways that people are getting to that same information. So now we're really, really ready to draw those pictures. You have to think about where your navigation is going to live. There are 3 places where it generally lives. It can live on the top. So the benefits are that all of it is visible at once. You don't have to scroll. It also leaves the full width of the screen available to content. It's good if you have a few big categories, but if you get to more than 4 or 5, you end up with the dreaded more. And that just creates another level of navigation that you weren't previously accounting for. And with smaller and smaller screens, really you are limited. So then the other option is navigation location at the left. This means that you can, your vertical space can continue as long as people are willing to scroll. So that means you can have more categories, but it leaves less space for the local navigation and content on the page. You could put your navigation on the right. I know of a few sites that do it. Drupal.org does it. It's not really the best place for navigation. It's not where people expect it to be, and the expectation is really the important part. It's also just considered a less important part of the page, and so they are less likely to be able to find it. There are many, many, many places you can reinvent things, try to break new ground. I promise you, the research says right navigation, not the way to go. Promise.
Unless it's the Japanese version of your website.
Yes, caveat being all of this is for Americans that, speak English, read left to right. If you were looking at something in Hebrew, they read right to left, so then all of this goes out the window. Maybe it's just you switch it, maybe it's not. I haven't done research in other countries, so I don't really know. So we are finally getting to the mega menu that you guys have been waiting for the past half hour. So this is something that you can use for either top or left navigation. The identifying piece of it is that you have your categories and then you have items within it. So in 2009, Jacob Nielsen, who's a really big deal in UX, endorsed mega menus as a viable, usable option. So that's it, right? We're done. We don't need to have this conversation anymore. Mega menus everywhere. Yay! Woo! No. So it does allow you to see multiple levels of navigation at once. So it requires less drill down. It also allows for recognition over recall. People can recognize, oh, yeah, I wanted computers and it's over there. Or I wanted printers and ink and it was under computers. Yeah, I remember that a little bit better. You always want to go with recognition over recall when you can and it is a feasible option. You don't want to drive yourself crazy doing it. It can also be potentially overwhelming. You'll notice that Amazon really shrunk down the pieces that were in the mega menu, because if you had all of Amazon's offerings in one mega menu, your head would explode, or at least mine would. It can be used at any level of navigation, but keep in mind it also takes up a large portion of the screen, which means that it is not a very good option for mobile or for low resolution screens, because your phone is only this big, and if your menu is this big, there's going to be a problem. You don't want people scrolling within your menu. There's also breadcrumbs for making your navigation a little bit more friendly for sense of place. It's good for Pogosticking. It gives you the hierarchy. Expert users are actually the ones who get the most benefit out of the breadcrumbs because they know exactly where they need to hop to. A small note, use the caret or an arrow instead of the colon, because it indicates that you are going deeper, and this leads to that, leads to the next. There's no question about the direction. It should live right under the page title. However, it's still unclear whether it really decreases completion time or increases success. However, it might not help, but it's not going to hurt. Part of it is also that if experts are getting the most use out of it, the smallest percentage of people are experts. So then we've talked about where to put our main navigation, sub-navigation. Now, this can get a little tricky because it partially depends on where your main navigation was. You should always start with the left or the top. Your sub-navigation can switch places. So you can go from top to left or left to top, but you shouldn't switch again. Your second and third selections should be from the same place. Generally, there should not be a fourth or fifth selection, so that is why we're only talking about the top three. Top, left, left, and left, left, left were considered to be the best for user task success. Now, I just said left a lot of times. So what the top, left, left is, you first make a selection up here, and it opens a menu on the side. So then there's departments, also from LL Bean, et cetera, and then there are sub options within there. So you're going top, to the left, and staying on the left. With left, 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 this is your typical accordion sort of navigation. So you click on something, and then it just goes deeper, and then you click on another item, and it would go deeper within there. So you're staying on the left the entire time. I'm gonna take this moment for a PSA. Hover is not good usability. People think that hover is faster than click. It feels faster because it just appears. However, how many people have accidentally triggered a hover menu? Okay. So how many people have accidentally moved out of a hover menu when they didn't mean to? So the main problem is that when you're hovering, you use these unnatural cursor movements. You have to move to the side and then down as opposed to moving in a straight line. So if you move in a straight line, you went to sports and fitness, you want the item that's at the bottom, you go straight, oh, suddenly you're clicking on something in grocery and pets or health and beauty, and that's not where you want to end up. You have to do this over and down motion. So even though it may feel faster for the just, oh, it pops up and it's there, it actually takes more time. Also, you have the issue of if someone wants to click on something right under a hover menu, they have to go around and underneath so that there isn't a hover menu over the item that they want to click on. So we've talked about where navigation should be. There's also times that navigation shouldn't be. Now, this is a very drastic decision that you make that, okay, a user is going to be here and their option is to continue in the way that I tell them to or leave. People always have the option of leaving. So this is when it's crucial for users to take a specified path. So usually for initial setup wizards, or if they're doing like your taxes and you need to go through something in a specified order. At some point there might be navigation where you can go back to something, but you can't go forward before it's time. This is really if someone is gonna have to come back to it anyway and skipping it doesn't do them any good, then you can take away your navigation. However, it does leave people feeling sort of like, oh, okay, all my choices have been taken, I'm a little trapped. So you want to make sure that you are, just like when you're thinking about your roadblocks, you need to make sure that you're doing this for good reason. So, how users search. There's 4 different ways. There's the known item search. So, I am searching for information architecture blueprints for the web. Very specific book. Okay. Then there's exploratory seeking. Okay, I need a book about information architecture. Then there's don't know what I need to know. I need to do something about the navigation. That's the one that's hardest to deal with because people aren't really going to have the words they need. They're not necessarily going to be able to recognize what it is that they should be searching for. Knowing what you don't know is always the hardest. Then there's refinding. So there was this book, I read it, it had a blue cover. And so some of these things you're going to want to support. Maybe you should have an actual search box, or maybe they should be able to filter by category. Again, thinking about your users, what they're going to be looking for, and what the best way is to get them there. An important part of navigation is wayfinding. So if you're studying information architecture, you spend a lot of time looking at maps because people need to figure out how to get from one place to another. And some maps are really good and some maps are really not. Transit maps are known for kind of, okay, so you can kind of tell where you are geographically, but they flatten out that information to make it easier for you to read. Because do you really need to know that this particular line makes these tiny little curves? It's not going to help you and it's just going to clutter. Think about the same things when you're thinking about your categories. Do you really need to know, well, technically there's this subcategory and that subcategory and that subcategory, but the stuff is all close enough, so maybe we should group it all together. Also, it's been found that in general, when men are navigating, they navigate by cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, and street names, whereas women navigate by landmarks. Okay, so turn at the 3rd gas station after the 2nd McDonald's. Well, online, you only have your landmarks, so that is automatically unnatural for half of the population. So you need to make sure that your users know where they are, where the thing is that they need. Okay, so they have to figure out how they got there. So there was the McDonald's and there was the Dunkin's, but it was the 3rd Dunkin's because we're in Massachusetts and there's one every corner. And they also have to know where they've already looked. So I know that I've had the experience, I was looking for my keys, I looked in the same 4 places because those are the only logical places for keys to be. I completely ignored the refrigerator, which was where I put them after I was putting groceries away. But I didn't know that I'd already looked at this place until I'd done it several times. So maybe it can be recently searched or recently viewed, or you can have the different color links. There are a lot of ways to say, okay, you've looked here already, you left here, it wasn't where you wanted to be. Or if someone is refinding, oh, I was here before, that's a good sign. Then there are just a few more things to keep in mind when you're designing your navigation. So people perform better with deep navigation rather than shallow. If you give people too many choices at the beginning, they get nervous, they're worried they're going to make the wrong decision, and they just go, thanks, no thanks, I'm just not going to make a choice. Good navigational structure doesn't make up for junk labels. You need to make sure that your labels are telling people what they need to know. The thingamajig with the stuffy stuff, it's not going to get you there. Also make sure that you're organizing your products and features by what they have in common as opposed to the goals. Remember the slide I had earlier about Zillow, Trello, and Facebook? People can actually be coming in with multiple goals, and so if you organize by the wrong goal, it's going to make things very difficult for people to find. But if you are organizing by categories of, okay, So shirts are over here, books are over here, car parts are over here. They're going to be more likely to figure it out on their own. I also talked about a small percentage of your user population being experts. There are also novices. It's their first or second time. They're not sure what they're doing. These people eventually become intermediate or expert users, large portion staying at intermediate. Need to make sure that you're not getting in anybody's way. Knowing when you're needed and when you're not is an art. Who remembers Clippy from Microsoft? And how it was all, it was the best of intentioned little critter, but he was always in your way. And everyone was, bye Clippy, go away. How can I close you out faster? You don't want to be Clippy. Also build sustainable structures. At some point, whatever project you're working on is going to grow. Things are going to need to change. You want to put that as far down the road as possible. You don't want to do a redesign this week and have to do another one next week or next month. So avoid making your structures too narrow or too deep. Because again, when people get too many choices, they get scared, they panic. With mobile first, people are regularly asking, well, what's different about mobile? Well, your space is very different on a 5-inch phone versus a 27-inch desktop. So you have to be more selective about what it is that you are actually putting front and center. Also, fat finger syndrome, you mean to tap over here and you tap a tiny bit to the side and you're clicking on something totally different. So your targets need to be large enough. Making things smaller so they'll fit on the page is not a viable option. Some of your navigation might be hidden. We are not going into the hamburger tray menu conversation at all. No opinions on which is better, but it is a reality of mobile life. And hover is generally not an option. Apple is doing some interesting things with the touch force, so there are alternates to actually clicking, but that's a bit down the road before you take too much advantage of that. Just keep in mind that's also only Apple, and there are lots of other mobile options out there. The relevant content might be different on mobile too, because with your location data, other information, it can be context aware. So maybe if you're in a car parts store, it should be telling you about car parts. There's also Bluetooth devices that are starting to say, okay, if you're in this part of, I believe it's Walmart, and you have our app, we can tell you about the specific deals that you can find right here. So with that, any questions? Yeah?
So could you comment on what I think it's called a one-page site, effectively, or sort of, I think of it as the square space site, which basically is everything rolls from top to bottom. Menus are not nearly as used or visible or what have you. Fundamentally a different structure than I think that, top left, left, right, whatever. What are there any? Are you aware of any studies of usability? Certainly, there's attractiveness issues and whatever. What's your?
I can give you opinions all day, but for actual studies, I have not significantly looked into that. There are some different difficulties, so you need your return to top of page to be an item that you can actually see, unless you want someone to be scrolling for days. So you still generally have some amount of navigation that will skip you to a different part of the page. It just behaves somewhat differently. It is a bit newer than a lot of the resources that I was looking at that are focusing on your large site, which for my day-to-day work is also what I focus on. So there might be things out there, but I do not know.
Chartbeat is a good resource for that type of research.
Chartbeat?
Chartbeat, yeah. But keep in mind it's a biased source because it is a company that produces analytics data for where people are on a single level page like that and how much time they spend, how engaged they are. But they share that information on their blog
that is relatively a newer beast, and I would imagine the analytics are also very different on that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, then I'm going to move to Shameless Plug. I'm going to be giving this presentation again at the UXPA Boston conference on the 29th. There will be a link in my slides. It'll be a really great conference focused on usability, of course, as well as some product and project management. And I've got all of my resources in the deck if you are curious about digging in any further. This information architecture book was invaluable. It was a great low-level way to get in, but it was also detailed enough that you can actually make decisions after just reading it. So if you are interested in information architecture, would strongly suggest it. It's the only one that's not a link in my resources. All right, guys. Thanks very much.
Sure.